Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today and just showing your interest as well as your alliance. The title for today's event is United for Justice, Africans Seeking Action. And my name is Asimbi Sebegeni, and I'm the Diaspora and Inclusion Officer for Hub Cymru Africa and Sub-Saharan Advisory Panel. I want to highlight that this is a safe space where we welcome questions, dialogues, and we really just do encourage respect when making any inquiries to the panel today. Before we begin, I'd like to ask a rhetorical question. What does climate justice mean to you? According to climate justice relates to concerns about the inequitable relations to different people and different places associated with vulnerability to climate impacts, such as mudslides or lack of water, etc. In simpler terms, it highlights the connection between climate crisis and social, racial, as well as environmental issues, showcasing how the imbalance and disproportionate impacts of climate change affect low-income countries around the world. I'd like to hand over to Reese, who works with Size of Wales and is a co-designer for these sessions. And he will tell you a little bit more about the work that Size of Wales does. After that, we will look at the work that Hub Cymru Africa does, and then we will go into the panel discussion and close with a Q&A. So over to you, Reese.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introductions. My name's Reese. I'm the Community Outreach Officer for Sides of Wales. And like Cindy said, together and other partners have co-designed this really exciting virtual panel discussion, which should be good. Next slide, please. So if you don't know about Size of Wales, we are basically a deforestation charity that is trying to make Wales part of the global solution to climate change. We work with Indigenous and local people worldwide to grow trees and protect at least 2 million hectares of tropical forests, which is around about the same size of Wales. And in Wales, we also campaign to drive policy change and are calling for Wales to become the world's first deforestation-free nation. And thirdly, we also have the aim of educating people in Wales about the critical role that Indigenous communities play in protecting the climate, biodiversity, and livelihoods worldwide, raising awareness on the value of our connection to the natural world, and inspiring communities in Wales to use their voice and take positive socio-environmental action. To not only improve their individual environmental impact, but also environmental justice more broadly in Wales. Next slide. So our work involves us working with Indigenous people and local communities across the tropics, including in Africa, and more specifically in Kenya and Uganda. Our work here supports communities to secure and sustain their forest territories and also grow millions of trees. It's obvious that Indigenous community and local communities are the best forest guardians, centuries and centuries of knowledge and experience. Therefore, we support these community-led initiatives that protect vital forest and addresses social injustices whilst mitigating the impacts of climate crisis. Some examples include projects on sustainable livelihoods, women's empowerment, and the blending of modern technologies with Indigenous traditional knowledge. It's obvious, and we're all well aware, that the climate crisis affects all of humanity, and tropical forests are a vital solution to the climate crisis. And together, we want our work to be able to ensure that we have a future with forests. And on screen, there are two examples of how we are attempting to do this. So the first one, the Odyet of Mount Eldon in Kenya. So they have suffered ongoing evictions from their ancestral lands, and alongside them, we are working to support them in seeking legal recognition for their territory and preserving traditional cultural practices, empowering women in their community in the struggle for self-determination. The second example is referring to the Mbali Trees program in Uganda, which is aiming to plant 50 million trees by 2030. And at the minute, we're about halfway there. So tree seedlings here are reared in small tree nurseries dotted across a vast region. The trees are distributed then for free to schools, farms, households, and so on. And environmentally friendly and integrated livelihoods are woven throughout this program, for example, through stuff like beekeeping and honey farming. So that's a really quick insight into size of whales. And I'll now pass back to Simbi for to touch upon Hub Cymru Africa.
Awesome. So I'd like to briefly summarize Hub Cymru Africa in a few words and what we represent. We represent global solidarity in Wales. Hub Cymru Africa is a partnership supporting the Wales and Africa community, bringing together the work of Global Health Links Cymru, the Sub-Saharan Advisory Panel, and Fair Trades Wales. Our work varies from offering development support, designing an anti-racism charter, giving advanced mentoring, and sharing funding opportunities for micro-charities in Wales. Climate change is the greatest global challenge of our times, and it needs mobilization of entire communities. I would like to start by shining a spotlight on a youth-led movement known as Climate Cardinals, which is based in the North American region, but is making positive impact all around the world, including Africa. This volunteer initiative works to translate climate information into over 100 languages, and many African languages are included in the work that they do. Communities with little access to educational resources and awareness are benefiting tremendously. Global solidarity and diaspora involvement in climate action are closely connected and intertwined, as both reflect the collective effort to change climate issues and transcend national borders, working with the unique position of diaspora communities. Diaspora communities in different parts of the world are already playing a key role in advancing climate action, climate justice, sustainable development, and humanitarian assistance in disaster-specific areas. By contributing their ideas, expertise, heritage, as well as heritage knowledge, as well as all that they are knowledgeable in. Cities like Cardiff, Swansea, and many other areas around Wales have populations of Africans, and these are places where we can foster innovative and inclusive approaches to climate action. By engaging diaspora and providing platforms that enable exchange of learnings and implementation of good practice in Wales and Africa can be highly beneficial. In response to this, Size of Wales and Hub Cymru Africa want to start a series of climate action events or sessions where we show how the issue of climate challenges involve everyone. And that is the heart of what we want to do here. So I'd like to get started with today's session and just quickly highlight the panel members that we have today that are doing incredible work in the climate justice and climate action space. Starting with Dr. Ernest, we have Steve Sodzi, Sanab Hersi, and we should be joined by Ize Adava. Please feel free as we go along this panel to share your questions or comments, as well as emojis for the reactions on what's being said. We do want to engage everyone in the room. So I'd like to start with the first question. And I'd like to say, can each member of the panel just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe what your reason for the passion in environmental issues is. And I'd like to start with Dr. Ernest, please. Thank you. Sorry, you are on mute, sorry.
This happens all the time. Thank you, Cindy, and for everyone that's here. So I am an environmental scientist. I am a reader at Cardiff University, and I do a lot of research around global issues that are related to the evolution of the Earth and the biosphere over time, going back to 4 billion years ago, looking at the oceans and trying to understand the climate at that time, and how all of this has come together over 4.5 billion years of Earth history. And this involves looking at atmosphere. Oxygen is here now, it wasn't there before. CO2 has varied over time. And I've come to find a really strong link between Earth processes and biological processes. So naturally, I'm inclined to drawn to things like this because for sure, what we do today is very critical. And I always tell my students this, that listen, we talk of climate change, we think that we are saving the Earth. We are not. We're trying to save ourselves. This planet has been here for 4.5 billion years running. And if we do not take care of it, we are the ones that are going to lose out. The climate is going to heal itself and continue. So this is my message. And really, yes, I'm quite happy that I'm here, and hopefully I can contribute in one way or the
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ernest. I'd like to hand over to Isa Dava. If you could please introduce yourself and maybe just share your passion or what you're passionate about in the environmental space.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ize, and I'm a soil scientist by academic training, and I'm also still doing some research in soil and environmental sciences. However, I am also a very passionate environmental advocate. You'd find me in climate and environment spaces. I'm laughing because a few people know me as a regular suspect in those spaces. And I believe my being here today will be closely related to the work I do in climate and environmental advocacies. I currently also work as the community coordinator for Climate Cymru Ethnic Minorities, which is hosted by Climate Cymru. And we're currently implementing a Warm This Winter grant. In a roundabout way, this is all linked to climate change, the need for environmental justice, the need for climate change mitigation and adaptation in one way or the other. You'd always find it in the scope of the work that I do. And I believe that as we continue to have interactions today, more of these will come out in one way or another. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Steve, if you could just give us an introduction of yourself and where your passion lies in the environmental challenges around the world or in the community.
Okay, I'm Steve Sodzi. I trained as an electrical engineer, but I work as a and I got interested in issues relating to the environment when I set up a club that sort of focused on supporting a nature reserve in Ghana, where I'm from. So we were abreast with all the things that go on with trying to maintain a protected area and all the challenges. We have sort of our main emphasis in supporting the communities around this nature reserve because one, it's too dangerous to go in. One, You might meet some illegal loggers who will not be very friendly with you. So we stay out of the nature reserve. But for now, we focus on helping communities around. And that's where I started. And we've been doing things like introducing planting of coffee. Been doing for a couple of years and supporting tree planting. Now we are branching into supporting other communities as well through a charity we've set up here called Caendon. And I'm passionate about the environment because, as the doctor said, it is our home and we need to leave something for future generations. I think that's part of why I'm passionate about the environment and addressing climate change.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Zainab, if you could just give us just a brief introduction and your heart in environmental work.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. So I'm Zainab. A little bit about myself is I just really like being in nature and connecting with nature. And then from there sort of sparked interest in gardening and being outdoors and sort of immersing myself in that. I've just realized that lots of people that look like me weren't there in those spaces. And also I've been quite a lot involved in climate action and things like that. And I just feel like through the work I do now, which is an organization called Green Soul, I just want to make it more accessible to people of color, really, to get people involved in nature connection and being able to take action on climate. So that's where it all sort of came for me. It's just a personal interest that sparked me sort of doing wider work. I'm not and I haven't got a background in environmentalism. I did law. I studied law, so I just think for me it's just my own interest in nature and sort of being outdoors really that sparked everything for me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I'll just like to go into the second question just to get the panel rolling. So in terms of each one's opinion, and really free flowing, anyone can begin the answer. What, in your opinion, is the role of communities in achieving pro-environmental action to improve environmental spaces and justice in Wales? So anyone can begin, but we just want to get a feel of that from each of the panel members.
Right, maybe I should just carry on with this. Looking at the way, our society is structured, or societies, people live in important groups. We live in communities, we live in tribes, we are very social beings. And things tend to work when we work as a team, right? So individually, it can be very difficult. And with the issue of climate change, the people that are actually affected the most are local people. Their businesses, those involved in agriculture, and also coming up with new ways of tackling climate change. We need local communities to be involved in designing new businesses. For example, in Wales, there's a very local business there where some group of individuals have come together and they're trying to cultivate seaweed. And they're going to use that seaweed into producing plastics and all sorts of things. So this is, the kind of getting their business to a situation where, the net input of CO2 in the atmosphere is zero, because all of that is what comes from the seaweed is cycled through society in all sorts of different ways, and it does not involve digging up the earth to extract fossil fuels. And it's a community-based action. Now, we in our communities, we elect the MPs and so on, working as groups in this environment. I think communities can really, really place a lot of or exert a lot of pressure on these MPs and politicians to actually design new strategies or implement new strategies that can actually help curb climate change. This involves the kind of research we do, because these days the government tells us the kind of research that they want us to do. Before, it was easy for me to sit down and come up with an idea and say, this is what I want to do. But today, most funded programs or research is actually designed by the government. So communities coming together and putting pressure on the government by actually indicating to them what the things are or the problems that they're facing with respect to climate change, and asking the government to place money or resources into new ways of helping us understand this problem, and then come up with better solutions. I think this is really critical.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing that. I don't know if anyone feels a connection to that, to what Dr. Ernest has said in terms of answering or just sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think communities have a pivotal role in attaining environmental justice, because at the end of the day, who are communities? It's individuals doing things together. So it's at some point distills down to the individuals and us. However, there's a lot of expectations, or rather, there's a lot of things that the community can do to help achieve environmental justice, or and some of it include like Dr. Ernest talked about. Communities can with one voice exert a policy influence as need be. Um, Communities, I think it was Stephen who gave one of the examples of the work that they do about planting trees. I think it was a cocoa tree you talked about.
Coffee.
Now, good. So communities can have such communal actions where you either manage green spaces, have community gardens. There are some of those initiatives that we have been pushing at individual levels in Wales, especially around community gardening and all of that. My role is basically to um, galvanize ethnic minority involvement in the climate discourse, because um a number of you may agree with me, but the climate discourse is kind of far-fetched from our community. Our realities differ in such a way that when you look at our priorities, the climate discourse is not on our top priorities. Our economic realities take priority of that. And in a converse way, or in an interesting way rather, climate change and the effects of climate change have if it have impacts on our economic realities, maybe not directly in Wales, but when we take a look back at sub-Saharan Africa, we can see those effects a lot more. And so communities in Wales specifically can work together to have practical things like, as I mentioned earlier, community resources, community gardening, depending on what aspect of mitigation or adaptation that a community is focusing on. You can have things like carpooling, for instance, tools, I think it's called upcycle shops. And I can't remember the right phrase for it these days, just encouraging the culture of reduce, reuse, and recycle in more practical ways. But it's important to know that communities have a voice and can be pressured. And I think it was Dr. Ernest that talked about the fact that we elect our politicians, and as such, we can make demands on them. I remember that in the last election cycle, for instance, we hosted I think about four of or so prospective candidates, and to the North Wales Africa Society, and we wanted them to talk to us not just about their manifestos as politicians going into government, but we wanted to hear what their inclinations and their leanings were when it comes to environment and climate. That was us wanting to know who would take our votes or who can sway us to vote for them because possibly we align on climate and environment issues. So one of the things I always tell members of our community is we have a voice. We should make it count. It should be heard. And I think that's one of the places where it's very important. And as climate Cymru ethnic minorities, for instance, we have noticed this paucity of professionals in environment and climate space. If we look at the environment and climate space in Wales, um, for lack of better words, you will not find this diversity in there. So one of the roles or one of the objectives of the CCEM is to provide a platform where we can have professionals in the spaces to say, we're here, talk to us, we can give you solutions. We are trained. Some of us are interest drivers. Zainab is legal, and she says she studied law. I'm like, well, there's some legal thing somewhere at the end of the day. After all, we'll come to environmental justice at some point. We need you. You're a professional in environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if Zainab or Dr. Steve Sodzi, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. One other way in which the community can support climate action is through companies that we work for. Companies need to satisfy some ESG deliverables. And I worked in an oil and gas company previously. I was able to raise some money through the staff there, about £300. It wasn't a lot, but it went towards environmental related work in Africa. Current company I work with, the same, and I'm going to keep going back to them for more money. So that's an area that individuals can raise money locally through their communities. What is it? Cycling, whatever. But a lot of practical things can be done to raise funding to support climate action. There are lots of volunteer opportunities for people to actually go out and do stuff that are really exciting opportunities. And I think if more people, especially people from the ethnic minorities, know about such opportunities, I'm sure a lot of them will be interested in doing something practical to help.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, Zainab, I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to that.
I can add a few things. That was really interesting points that everyone else raised. But I think very similar to what Izzy and Ernest have said, it's just sort of putting pressure really on your local and national governments to sort of take action. I've been trying to do that a little bit, but it's quite difficult work doing it on your own. So I think as a community coming together as communities and sort of having the same message, putting the same message across is just really important. And then just starting with your own household as well. So making changes at home and trying to really live that. So then you can, influence others as well. And it'll ripple out to the community, to your streets and then neighborhoods. So for me, like I do things at home that help really the environment by sort of buying things from a farmer's market. So not buying food that's not locally grown. So I try my best, but I think people could take action at home as much as they can and then it'll ripple out as well. So that's my little 2 pence worth for that question.
Definitely. No, I think those are great insights. Yeah, I think everyone did touch on this, but we did want to ask, how do we specifically encourage diaspora engagement in environmental action, and why is it important? Because I think we can look at, involving diaspora engagement, but I think people need to also understand why it's important to have diaspora engaging and, diaspora speaking on climate action, climate justice, climate challenges in Wales, in their community here, community back home. Yeah, I think that's the question that I just roll over to the panel, whoever wants to start.
I think it's, members of African diaspora are uniquely positioned. In some cases, they would have been exposed to living in both ends, whether being in Wales and being in some part of Africa or the other at one point in time. So they kind of may have some familiarity with what the situation looks like. And this is supposed also to give a unique opportunity to having experienced both places for people who are environmentally inclined and climate conscious, that is, this can help improve the stance of the advocacies they represent. I give you a case in point. When Climate Cymru started out, I think that was in October, no, that was in 2021 when we had COP26. That was around when all of that started, you know. It gave us an opportunity not only to advocate for things in Wales, but also to network back at home. You know, for instance, as a person, I remember when we had the devastating 2012 floods back in Nigeria. I was I was a lead consultant in designing a psychosocial support program for victims of the flood, which meant that I got to see firsthand the sufferings of people resulting from the floods that happened. You know, it was one of the most devastating that Nigeria had up until that time. This would repeat itself about 7 years down, 7 years later in 2019 or thereabout. However, having seen that and living in the West, understanding the fact that the people I saw who were suffering from the effect of the floods had no idea, do not even contribute to the climate change that is causing the flood that they are suffering from. You know, it stirs up this interesting anger in me. And I think at some point we'll get to that in the discussion. So diaspora engagement is important because you can lend a voice both at home via networking with local organizations back at home who are in environment advocacies, activism, and all what else. And also you can lend your voice in the West where you are, you know, to the mechanisms in place, you know, to engage the governments either to advocate to say you have to cut your contributions to climate change, you know, whether it's in reducing dependence on fossil fuels, making investments in renewable energies and all of that. You know, it give members of African diaspora have this unique placement of being able to see the perspective from the recipient side and also from the donor side. Forgive me for doing that disparity, but that's the best way I can articulate it at this moment, and I hope it makes sense. Thank you.
No, that does. Thank you. Yes, Zainab.
Yeah, just want to jump in on the back of what Izzy was saying. So I think it is about like making discourse relatable as well. So relating it to communities of color and not making it sort of like a closed group. So I think when I was going into all of this, I was looking for groups and things to join into. I found it quite difficult to join into like climate action groups and things like that because sometimes the places they were meeting weren't even sort of I don't know, it wasn't right for me to meet in certain settings they were meeting. So it was mainly in like pubs and things like that. So I don't drink alcohol. I'm Muslim, so I wouldn't feel comfortable in these settings. So I think it's about making it more accessible for people as well and allowing them to actually have a voice. Because obviously we're more disproportionately affected by climate change in the UK and abroad. So I think it's kind of, drawing people in from different backgrounds and sort of not making these groups kind of closed. Because a lot of them are sort of quite white-centric groups. They're not diverse groups. And it just feels a little bit, it doesn't feel very inclusive, really. We're discussing issues that affect our community abroad, but we're not really included in the discourse. So I think it's just opening up opportunities for people of colour for me.
Definitely, definitely. No, makes a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing.
Can I
Can I
say my little bit as well?
Yes, please, TVS, come in, yes.
Okay, what I want to say is that with regard to engaging the diaspora community in climate change, there are lots of practical projects that people can be involved in that will increase their career prospects, things from managing projects to designing innovative technological solutions. I'll give an example. In Ghana, where we've supported beekeeping, one of the most expensive parts of making the beehives is designing or machining the top bars. So we've actually designed a prototype machine that can be kept in the village, that is solar powered and can just be run at absolutely almost no cost. So there are a lot of really interesting young things young people could do that will not only increase their career prospects, but are great fun and great sources of learning. And I think they need to be exposed to some of these great opportunities that overall will enhance their professional advancement as well.
That makes a lot of sense, Steve. Thank you so much. I don't know if Dr. Ernest, you want to come in with.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting point, and they're all really, really valid. And when I look at examples that I've encountered, so I walk into a classroom and I start to talk about environmental issues in the West. I'm often very, very struck by the idea that lots of students, they will immediately push this to say China. China is the one, releasing all the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The environmental degradation is China. You talk about plastic pollution. It somehow it ends up being developing countries that are dumping their waste, in the waterways because they don't know how to treat this. So there's a lack of connection when it comes to how global the world is, and the fact that one thing that's happening here. So you produce the plastics here, they end up somewhere here. The Africans didn't produce the plastics, we're very industrialized here. So there's a lot of pollution occurring here that has come with the type of civilization that has happened here. So pollution is, and it's this lack of understanding that's a problem. So I think me being there as someone that's seen these different perspectives, it becomes my responsibility to try to communicate this in a very meaningful way to the students so they understand it, that it's not truly what you're saying. This is a global problem. This is not a problem that is based on China alone. China is producing the things because we're buying those things. China is polluting because we're consuming. It's a global problem. So to find solutions, it's really important for us to work as a team. And I think this is what people from the diaspora they can do when we insert ourselves into the spaces, and hopefully we're heard, because that's one of the problems. The problem of being heard and taken seriously. Right? That is, and this works on both directions. Right? The governments in Africa, a lot of them, for example, are quite corrupt, and anything that's coming in to destabilize what is the status quo, they push it away. You're talking about climate, they're making their money in this way. They don't want to invest in something that's going to take that from them. But here, at the same time, it's really difficult for you as a Black person, for example, to get your voice heard.
Makes 100% sense. Yeah. I think what you've said, how it ties in, and it's a domino effect, really. So yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts. And I don't know, Ize, you want to add to that quickly before we go?
Yeah, one reason why diaspora engagement is also very important is the fact that when we help open our network by engaging not just here but also back home, we also help midwife or bridge the gap between people back home being able to access say better information or even funding. I remember that one of the outcomes from a COP26, for example, was that some colleagues were able to provide direct mentorship, to younger people who are back in Africa, who have organizations doing amazing things in climate advocacy and climate change activism, And one of the other things is because I think it was Dr. Ernest who mentioned something about funding or research becoming fixed obligated these days. And we also understand that it's being able to get funding to support work done, especially back on the continent, is a bit tricky. So diaspora engagement in these spaces can help bridge those gaps. People can be introduced to potential opportunities. People can collaborate with people back home on potential funding opportunities that can help achieve the aims and the goals that the various organization back at home have set out to do. So it's important that diaspora engagement is maintained. It builds network. It strengthens network, and it broadens network as well. Thank you.
Awesome. No, thanks. Thank you so much. So I think we had touched on this question a bit, but now to just look at your perspectives from a personal level as well as from your level of focus in environment. What is your perspective on the disproportional impact of climate change on different communities, specifically those who contribute the least? What are your thoughts to this?
I think. Go on. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So I think that it's a rather unfortunate place to be, really, because it's one of the biggest injustices that you can have. And this is not me crying wolf, because as much as we are consumerists and may have in one way or the other contributed to the realities that we are facing because we engage, we buy, as Dr. Ernest said earlier, when you still look at it on the scale of um, on the scale of effects, it's so huge. And climate change it's not just the fact that we talk about change in temperature and the weather and climate aspect of it that is the issue. Climate change has so much more reach. I remember being a speaker at a conference a year or two ago. I think it was a women thingy, and I was talking about climate and gender. And it shocked the participants when I told them the role of climate change in gender-based violence. It sounded so far-fetched, so it's a whole lot. When we talk about the effects of climate change and the fact that the least contributors, which is sub-Saharan Africa, and other, I do not like this word, but for the benefit of this conversation, third world countries, the less industrialized countries, being the most recipients of the effects of climate change. You find that climate change is a threat multiplier. What do I mean? In Africa, where you have a lot of where you have some reports of conflicts, where we have cases and incidences of extreme weather events, whether it's drought or flooding and all of that. And this is me bringing it back to gender, forgive me. Women and girls, for instance, are some of the most disproportionately affected people because in these instances where there is conflict, they are most vulnerable, to the vices that happen in conflicts, whether it's abuse or having to work extra hard to be able to find food and all of those. On girls, you'd find that where extreme weather events have happened, whether it's flooding or drought, and the effects are different because these are two different extremities I'm talking about. One is too hot, one is too cold, or rather, one is too wet. You find that girls may have to drop out of school to assist in the home front to do things. So this is, for instance, I won't call it an unintended outcome, but a seemingly far-fetched effect of climate change. And it just puts us further down in the food chain. And so you have the West building and riding on the where's the English? How have I forgotten my English today? I don't know what's going on.
You're passionate.
Thank you. So you find the West enjoying the dividends of industrialization, being the West like we know it to be, everything's working and all of that. But the underdeveloped nations are paying for the industrializations here. It just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right. I wonder how I mean the perpetrators sleep at night. It's kind okay, you say I'm getting all passionate. I'm just gonna yield the floor to other speakers.
I mean, thank you.
We love the passion.
Yeah, that goes into what I was trying to say exactly. Because now put it at a level here where we can understand it, right? So if you think of the people who fly the most in the West are the rich people. They're jetting their own jets, they're flying from one place to the other. They have the best infrastructure, the best homes, air conditioning, whatever thing. They live in very secured, safe areas. Right here in Europe, the poor people, when you think of your European standards, they live in areas where they're more exposed to, like flooding is likely going to be a problem for lots of people who are poor. If you have a really dramatic climatic event, like, think of, say, a heat wave, the people that are going to suffer are likely going to be the poor. So take that down all the way back to developing countries where they contribute the least to this. I mean, if you think about it, most Africans are not even allowed to travel out of the continent because of visa restrictions here, and they travel the least, right? So they're polluting the least, they're seeing the world the least, but the consequences of climate change, they're experiencing this the most. And I give you an example. We're doing this work in Cameroon, which is where I'm originally from, the north of Cameroon, getting up towards the Sahara Desert. Because of climate change, the water table is dropping, is basically getting lower and lower. So people are digging deeper holes into the earth to pull out water. And what that does is that they are now encountering water that has equilibrated with the rock, and it has led to the dissolution of fluoride into this water. So you have a whole community of children with teeth that are just falling, being affected because they're drinking this water. And we know this as scientists. We've seen this. We've come up with a way that it can purify this water by using local bone char, but the resources are not even there to build this, simple equipment for them to use to purify the water. Now, if that was in the Western world, that problem is going to be resolved quite quickly. And this is a direct consequence of climate change that you're seeing in a local community. And we're thinking that this problem can probably spread across the whole Sahel region, right? So communities, poor communities, people who are not really contributing to much of this, they're the ones suffering the most. And then the last thing I want to say is this: developing countries have to develop. If you look at the United Kingdom, for example, and this is not meant in a bad way, anything, we're trying to be sincere here. It used to be a forest. It used to be a forest, and today it's all beautiful, developed landscapes and things like that. Developing countries, they want to develop, and they're trying to copy the example that's been set by the developing world, but then they cannot do it because the only forest and the only natural things that can actually absorb in terms of plants that can absorb a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, most of these plants are located in the tropics. So there's the pressure when you turn up and say, no, we want you to conserve this land. We want you not to cut down these trees. But you don't provide the people with an alternate way of living. The people go and hunt in there. And I was so happy when you talked about this in Kenya, that you're doing something in Kenya where you're trying to get the local people to preserve their local life, their culture, and still live with the environment. And so there has to be additional effort on how to those countries come up with new ways. It would save the planet when it comes to climate change, really.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing that. I don't know, Steve, Sodzi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All I would say is that Africa has a large proportion of subsistence farmers who rely on rain-fed agriculture, and that's their main source of living. In Ghana, many years ago, when I was growing up, we had two rainy seasons. So farmers will grow crops in the first major season, they call it a minor season, they'll grow another crop. Now the seasons are merging. So that means that they might not be able to grow a certain crop. And this is a very clear indication of the impact climate change would have on them. So yes, it's very disproportionate. They don't have any insurance cover for field crops when they don't have rains and so on. And with this changing of seasons, it even much worse for them. So yeah, definitely there is a great disproportionate source of livelihoods being rain-fed subsistence agriculture.
Awesome. No, thank you guys so much for those thoughts. And we just have one more question. Um, then at like 1:30, we open the floor because a few people in the room want to ask questions specific to this, and we want to give that time so that the questions can also get the answers. So the last question would be, how can everyday community people in Wales make it more of an environmentally just nation? What can people do listening to this who want to get involved? What can they do? Yes, Zainab, go ahead.
I'll talk this time because I haven't talked enough. But I'd say, some of the thoughts I had before joining this discussion is sort of getting people to look at what's going on locally and see if they can join into any climate action groups or any activities really that's going on locally. But if there's not, maybe they can take some action themselves, arrange something like a clothes swap. I don't know, maybe start gardening, even if it's on your windowsill, even if you've only got a windowsill, start something small, like try and grow herbs. Do something to make yourself a little bit more resilient really as well. And to stop you from going to the supermarkets too much and sort of getting food that's being brought from miles and miles away. So I think taking some action yourself first, and maybe your locality, your community, and working together to do something to help the climate.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, very, very great points. I don't know who else wants to share what people can do to make Wales a more environmentally just nation, and how they can contribute on a personal level.
I'll say, sorry,
Go on.
little drops of water make a mighty ocean. And we need to continue to get the message across by whatever means we can. So people can organize events. Fundraising is a good way of raising awareness because then you are forced to fundraise for a specific reason and you can get out the message, really get people to commit something to either planting trees. But I'll say whatever we can do to get the message across, we need to encourage members of the diaspora and everybody else in Wales for that matter, to get that. Because sometimes people just are in a state of, what word do you use for it? Not denial, but people just don't know it's so bad with this climate change or will deny. So whatever we can do to get a message across, we have to keep trying.
Awesome, awesome.
There's some quick points from me. We can't hold to the past and expect change, right? So people have to be open to new technologies, new information that's coming, and be ready to adapt those technologies. I mean, adopt them and use them. People have to hold their officials accountable for the policies. They have to be very proactive, and people have to be more open to look on the global perspective of climate change. So they have to see further. So not just what they're being told, to understand that this is a global issue. And it's not about blaming one party all the time. It's about seeing how we can collectively resolve the problem. And then finally, implement grassroots strategy that empower people to take action.
Definitely,
I
definitely.
think it's important to contextualize this in the sense that there's only so much Wales can do because it's part of a group of nations. Yeah. So the big things, especially when you're talking about environmental justice, the big things, the big decisions will be held from Westminster. Yeah. However, some of the things that Wales has been doing so far, I don't know how many of you know, but Wales is one of the leading nations in the world, in the top five. Since 2017, it's been top three in recycling, for instance. You asked about what people can do individually. Wales has been leading as a top recycler nation, recycling about 65 or so percent waste in Wales. Third only to Germany and I think it was Austria in 2018, and as of 2022, um, still Germany, Austria, and Wales. Then we have South Korea and Singapore 2018. So that's one thing Wales has gotten right. I always tell people that I've become a classist when it comes to waste disposal. If I go down to England, I look at them, I'm like, guys, why would you not separate your waste, for God's sakes? You know? So there is that part as a nation. And I think that Wales as a nation has set ambitious targets to attain net zero by 2050. The climate policies, so far so good. We're still watching the space, especially with the fact that we have new governments, and we're still watching the space in Wales with the resignations that have happened and all of that. So it's important to keep in touch with leadership. It's important to find community groups to be a part of, and we have a lot of them. If you're in Wales and you live in Wales and you want to be a part of the movement, you can be a part of the movement by signing up to Climate Cymru, which is just climate.cymru. We started out as a group that was going to COP26 with about 10,000 Welsh voices. We ended up going to COP26 with about 15,000 Welsh voices, and over the years we have evolved, and especially with relation to people of ethnic minorities backgrounds, whether Black, African, Caribbean, and other ethnic minority group, is one of the reasons why Climate Cymru Ethnic Minorities exist. Climate Cymru Ethnic Minority is a different organization from Climate Cymru, but that's a whole different discuss itself. But it is currently hosted by Climate Cymru. And we've got a lot of programs, Nature Positive Wales, Warm This Winter, and that we are focused on, especially around advocacies. The website is climate.cymru. I'll put it in the chat at some point. Climate Camry, and to be a part of Climate Camry Ethnic Minorities, it's easy to sign up. I'll put the email, I'll put the link to the sign up forms and all of that. The opportunities that this give is that we're able to engage in spaces where it matters. For instance, I give an example with the Warm This Winter campaign. If there's any community that is quite affected by the cost of living crisis, is the ethnic minority communities, given our economic reality. And please feel free to disagree with me. I'm happy to engage on that. However, we found that especially with the cost of living crisis, the increase in energy bills, what it means is when you go into winter, your bills will increase as well, And for instance, the Warm This Winter advocacy has about 4 asks of the government, and it is emergency support now to bring people out of fuel poverty or to support people or take them from the brink of fuel poverty. Better homes, advocating for government financing for properly insulated homes, which would reduce cost personal finances spent on energy bills, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, increasing access to renewable energies. Those are the 4 asks of the Warm This Winter campaign. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to have a conversation with that. Over the past 3-4 years also, there's been this activity that's been going on. That's for people who want to really engage. I see that Zainab has been dropping some really good personal pointers in the chat as well. We've had something called the Great Big Green Week. It's been an opportunity to engage in the climate movement and all of that. I have organized for Bangor for about 4 years since inception. And so there are so many opportunities in Wales where you can be a part of climate movements and our climate advocacy platforms. There's so many opportunities to lend our voices. We need to speak. We've got the intellect. We've got the people. We have the presence to be able to stand up and contribute to the processes, because more often than not, the policies are made, we are not at the table. The policies become implemented, whether it affects us positively or negatively, we don't know, and it is how much of our voices are heard here will carry back to sub-Saharan Africa, because I find that a lot of people do not understand, especially when we talk about the environmental injustice. A lot of people do not understand the extent and magnitude of countries that least contribute to climate change suffering the most from it. I remember one of the vivid pictures of Lake Chad. If you go on Google or anything, look for a picture of Lake Chad from the 1960s. It was a vast expanse of land covered in water. There are some time-lapse pictures now. Lake Chad has shrunk so bad. It's crazy what is remaining. In Nigeria, northern Nigeria is highly susceptible to desertification and drought. I remember East Africa, Kenya, and some other parts experienced some droughts either early this year, late last year, sometime. So it's all over. Yes, River Niger, thank you. So we find all of our our assets are declining. Our soils in Africa, especially Nigeria, where I'm from, are inherently low in nutrients. And with the increase in temperatures, everything goes. And we are not even able to we have not even provided ourselves or accessed inorganic soil amendments, not to talk of being able to make investments in organic amendments. At some point when I'm sorry, cut me off, Isimbi, if I'm hogging your
No
mic
worries.
too much.
No, it's a great, you're making great points, and I think a lot of people are engaging, as we've just had the comment from Louisa. I know that we have some questions in the chat. And still, Sodzi, forgive me, I know you didn't. I want to maybe hand one question over to you so that you can give us your thoughts on that, because we didn't get to your response for the final question.
Don't
But
worry too much.
yeah, but I just wanted to ask, we have some very interesting questions here. We have one from Melissa. Uh, yes, Melissa Maxims. And she asks actually such an interesting question. She says, are there traditional practices or cultural linkages that can be highlighted to make climate action feel more personal and relevant to communities in Africa? I'm not sure how to go about that question, but it sounds very interesting. Are there thoughts that you have between the link between maybe traditional practices? Have there been traditional practices that have elevated, how the environment is taken care of? Um, yeah. Or if you need Melissa to just broaden her question a bit, we can do that as well.
Is that to me?
Shed
Or
more
to the
light.
panel?
Shed more light. Awesome. Melissa, if you're still with us, if you can just unmute and share maybe a bit of what you wanted out of this question.
Hi, yeah, I've really been interested in the discussion that has been going on. And for me, it was sort of coming from a point of view of every time I sort of talk about climate change with family, it's more like, oh, that's like a Western thing, like, oh, why are you bringing here? Why are you bringing that recycling talk, things like that. And I've been trying to just relate it and sort of think, is there something that I can say? No, actually, we have been interested in the environment as Africans, and it's not something that we sort of, I don't know if that makes sense, but it was just coming more from my own personal experiences.
Makes
Okay,
sense.
Melissa.
oh, sorry, you're gone.
Okay. Isimbi, send me off your mic.
No,
I'm hogging the mic too much.
please
Thank you,
do.
Melissa, for clarifying on that. Again, I remember when I started speaking earlier today, I said, for the most part, the climate discourse is far-fetched from the average African. It's not on our top 10. We've so far so good. We've accused, and rightly so, we've accused the West of white-splaining the climate change, because when you talk about climate change is, forgive me if it sounds like I'm making it racial, but climate change is white in its discourse, and that's one of the reasons why we want more of our people in the space who are knowledgeable and all of that. Coming back to the question you asked for, it can start with the least conversations. For instance, I don't know what part of Africa you stay, or I mean, what part of Africa you're from or where you stay. It can be as little. I have had success in conversations just talking about the weather. Over the years, summers have become hotter and winters have become colder. That's an entry point of conversations, And when you talk about cultural things and all, if you have people, again, it's about relatability. When you're talking about agriculture, for instance, if you're familiar with living back home, it is that a lot of people now, cost of living has skyrocketed. When there are conversations, people are talking about how food is expensive, for instance, in the market. That's an entryway for a conversation. However, some of the climate change mitigation strategies that we prescribe to individuals, even when I say them, I tell people, I know Africans, we will kick against it. If you tell people, for instance, don't eat too much meat, or rather reduce your meat intake, anybody in the continent will tell you, we have not even eaten the quota we should have. How dare you ask us not to eat meat? It is that, but it is it is achievable. This is not the meat eating. Hey, this thing is recorded.
No worries.
Anyway, it is achievable. For instance, when you're going into Rwanda, for example, I don't know how many of you are from Rwanda or have been to Rwanda. Rwanda has a very strict policy about plastic bags. In fact, when you're coming in, you are told not to come in as a visitor with plastic bags, And it's one of the, at least Kigali that I've been, is one of the neatest cities in Africa. We all have our parts to play, especially back home. So there are so many entry points to have for you to have conversations with people, but it has to be in a relatable way. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know if anyone wants to add. I think I saw Ernest wanting to give a thought real quick to that question.
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to say that one of the things is that we have to do more is to appreciate our culture as Africans. I think it doesn't matter whether you're an African or wherever you come from, is to appreciate the culture that is yours. Appreciate it and look into it and see the things that actually make that culture work. Because as an African, it's, I suddenly realized that when I grew up as a child, I had meat, but I didn't eat the amount of meat I eat now in Europe. So meat was not something that, we cooked meat and I just had a lot of meat on my dish. Meat was shared in a very proportionate way in the family, and everybody had just a good enough chunk. And I didn't like that. I wanted to eat as much meat as possible, right? I wanted, I didn't. But when I look at it now, in terms of climate change and all these things and the amount of meat we eat as an individual, and we used to eat our bones. The bone it has a lot of calcium. It's a very nutritious part of the meal. But here we basically dish that away. And I remember going back to Cameroon and visiting my uncle. He gave me chicken. I ate it. Me and my brother, we pushed the bones aside. And it was like, eat your bone, eat your bones. And we're like, no, 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 no. So these cultural practices that we had, there's so many things in it. There's a lot of food that we have in our culture that's basically vegetarian that I'm beginning to realize now that this was vegetarian. I didn't even know what was vegetarian, what was not. So individually, when we look into our cultures, we may find a lot of things, practices that we do. And I think it is upon us to actually appreciate those things and practice them instead of pushing them away and embracing a culture that then just contributes to what we're talking about here, really.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. And I know we have just 2 minutes. We do have a form to fill out while the questions are being answered, but we just have one more question. All the other questions, I will send them over maybe via email and send them to the participants themselves so that people can feel like they've gotten the response that they wanted. But we see all the engagement on the chat and we thank you all. Simeon had asked a question and I think it was touched on a bit. But in just basic words, how can diaspora communities exert influence on climate policies both in their home countries and host countries? So the connection. If anyone has 2 cents to add just before we leave, yeah. But Simeon, thank you for your question.
I think it's down to, in part, to money. I have an issue where there is some conservation issue, just getting the press to to sort of report on it is an issue. You have to sometimes pay for coverage. So we need to find ways of promoting and publicizing whatever messages we have. You can mobilize people up to a certain point, but you have to use the media as well.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. No, thank you so much, everyone, for coming here today. I want to specifically thank our panel. They've been amazing, and they've shared such insights, and they've begun a discussion where I think we want to continue a series that holds this conversation to heart. So we want to thank you all for being here and just for giving answers. I know it's a big topic. It can't be spoken about in an hour and 15 minutes, but definitely we can begin the conversation. And yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. There's a form And yeah, any other question that anyone may have, please just do send it. And yeah, we really appreciate you all being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.